Lily came back to Maple Street on a cloudy afternoon when the air smelled like rain and old memories. The blue house stood exactly as she remembered, its porch light flickering even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. It looked tired, a little faded, but still full of the kind of warmth that felt like home. She hadn't planned on staying long, just a few days to help her mom after surgery. But deep down she knew that returning here meant returning to more than her past. It meant facing Ethan. Ethan had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. He wasn't her brother by blood, but he had grown up in that same house. They had shared birthdays, school lunches, and late-night talks by the fire. When Lily's mother took him in, Ethan was just a quiet boy who had lost too much too young. She had been only 10 then, and he was 12. And together they had learned how to build a family from broken pieces. As she stepped through the front door, the floor creaked the same way it used to. And before she could even call out, she heard his voice. "You still walk like you're afraid of waking ghosts," he said. His voice had grown deeper, warmer, and when she turned, there he was, taller, broader, wearing a faded grey t-shirt and a smile that looked both familiar and new. For a moment time stopped. He looked at her like he couldn't believe she was real, and she felt her heart stutter in her chest. She tried to laugh it off, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Guess I didn't expect you to still be here," she said. "I never left," he answered simply. And that sentence carried more weight than either of them expected. They spent the first few hours catching up, sitting on the porch as the rain began to fall. Ethan told her about fixing cars at the local garage, about staying close to help her mom when things got hard. Lily talked about college, about the city, about how she thought leaving would make her feel free. But somehow it never did. There was comfort between them, but also something else, something quieter, stronger. Something that made her pulse quicken whenever his eyes met hers. It wasn't something new. It had been growing silently, like a shadow behind their laughter. That night, after dinner, Lily couldn't sleep. She walked to the window and saw Ethan outside fixing the old fence, the same one they had built together years ago. The light from the porch hit him just right, and for a second she saw not the boy she grew up with, but a man, tired, kind, and heartbreakingly gentle. Her chest tightened, and she hated how much she felt. She wanted to look away, but she didn't. She walked outside, barefoot on the cold wood. "You still can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. "Guess not," she said softly, watching his hands move, strong and careful. "You don't have to help," he told her, but she stepped forward anyway, taking a hammer from the toolbox. "I want to," she said. They worked quietly, side by side, the air between them filled with the smell of rain and wet earth. When their hands brushed by accident, she felt her whole body tense, and when he looked at her, something unspoken passed between them, a spark that neither of them had the courage to name. The silence grew heavier, not uncomfortable, but charged with everything they had never said. Ethan finally broke it. "You're different," he said quietly. "Everyone changes," she replied, trying to sound casual, but her voice trembled. "Not like that," he said. "You used to look at me like I was your brother." Her heart stopped for a second. She didn't know how to answer, because part of her still wanted to believe that was true. But it wasn't, not anymore. The air felt too thin, her legs weak, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "Do you still want me to?" He froze, the hammer still in his hand. The rain now falling harder, they stood there, not moving. Two people trying to fight something they had both seen coming for years. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain drummed against the porch roof, and thunder rolled somewhere far away. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, fast and unsteady. She turned away first, her chest rising and falling, her legs trembling beneath her. "Good night, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but shaking. She walked back inside before he could answer, closing the door gently behind her. Inside, she leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. Her reflection in the glass window looked like a stranger, flushed cheeks, wide eyes. A girl who had crossed an invisible line. She whispered to herself, "Don't do this," but her heart didn't listen. The next morning, everything looked normal again. The sun shone through the curtains. Birds sang. Her mom hummed in the kitchen. And Ethan was already outside fixing the mailbox. He waved at her, and she waved back, pretending nothing had changed, pretending her whole world hadn't shifted in a single heartbeat. She tried to fill her day with small distractions, helping her mom with breakfast, sorting mail, going for a walk down the quiet road that led to the lake. But no matter where she went, her thoughts followed her back to him, to the way he looked at her last night, the way his voice softened when he said her name. That evening, when the sun began to sink again, she found herself walking toward the fence. The air was cooler, and everything smelled like fresh grass and rain. Ethan was there, same place, same quiet focus. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" "Guess not," she said, trying to sound light. But her tone betrayed her. She handed him a glass of lemonade and leaned against the post beside him. Watching the light fade, the silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was familiar, almost safe. "Remember when we used to race down the hill after storms?" She said suddenly. "Yeah," he smiled. "You always fell. And I always had to catch you. And you always laughed," she said. "Because you always got back up," he replied. They both laughed, and for a moment, it felt like the old days. But then she looked at him again, and the laughter faded, replaced by that same quiet pull she couldn't fight anymore. She looked away quickly, biting her lip, hoping he wouldn't notice, but he did. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lily, what are we doing?" She shook her head. "I don't know," she said, her throat tight. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want to hurt you." "You're not," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "You never could." The air between them went still. She felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, her legs trembling just slightly. She wanted to step closer, to close the space between them, but she didn't. She couldn't. "Maybe we should stop pretending nothing's changed," he said quietly. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "And what if we can't?" For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The sky behind them turned orange, then purple, the day slipping away. Ethan looked at her like he wanted to say something, but didn't. Instead, he reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and in that single, simple touch, every memory they'd ever shared came rushing back. She stepped back, shaking her head slightly. "I should go," she whispered, and before he could speak, she turned and walked toward the house. Her heart raced, her mind spinning. Every step felt heavy. Her legs weak beneath her. That night, she lay in bed listening to the rain return. The sound reminded her of their laughter, their shared secrets, the way he used to sneak into her room during storms when they were kids, so she wouldn't be scared. Now she wasn't scared of the thunder anymore. She was scared of what was happening between them. Outside, she saw the porch light flicker again, and through the window, she could see him sitting on the steps, his head bowed, his hands clasped. Lost in thought, for a long time she watched him, unseen. her heart aching in ways she didn't know how to name. In that quiet, trembling night, Lily realized something she couldn't ignore anymore. Love doesn't always follow the rules you expect. It grows where it wants, sometimes between two hearts that were never supposed to meet that way. And though she didn't know what the next day would bring, she knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days after that night passed quietly, but nothing felt the same. Lily and Ethan moved through the house like two people walking around a secret. Careful not to touch it. Careful not to say too much. The air between them had changed, lighter on the surface but heavier underneath, full of things they didn't dare name. Her mom noticed, of course, mothers always do. "You two are too quiet lately," she said one morning while making breakfast. "It's strange seeing you both so grown up." Lily smiled faintly. Pretending it meant nothing, Ethan just kept fixing the squeaky cabinet door, his eyes avoiding hers after breakfast. Lily escaped to the backyard. She needed space to breathe. The autumn wind had begun to cool the air, and the leaves danced across the grass like tiny sparks of fire. She sat on the old swing Ethan built for her years ago. It still creaked, still swayed the same way, and somehow that small sound reminded her of everything she was trying to forget. She didn't hear him walk up, but she felt it, that subtle change in the air, the soft rhythm of his footsteps behind her. "You're up early," he said quietly. Hands in his pockets, she nodded. "Couldn't sleep." He leaned against the fence, looking at the horizon. "Me neither," he admitted. They both watched the morning unfold, the golden light stretching across the hills. It should have been peaceful, but peace didn't belong to them anymore. "We can't keep doing this," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," he said, "but I don't know how to stop." The honesty in his voice hit her harder than she expected. There was no anger, no guilt, just truth, raw and quiet. It was the kind of truth that lived between people who understood each other too deeply. She wanted to say something, anything, but words failed her. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and she felt her heart falter again. His eyes weren't asking for anything, but they said everything. She stood up suddenly, brushing her hands against her jeans. "I'm going for a walk," she said. And before he could reply, she turned toward the road. The small town was waking up slowly. Dogs barking. The smell of coffee drifting from porches. Everything looked the same, yet felt completely different. She passed Mrs. Cole's bakery, the same one she and Ethan used to visit after school. He'd always save his last cookie for her. Even when he wanted it himself, he always did things like that. Small acts of care that meant more than he'd ever admit. By the time Lily returned home, the sun was high, Ethan's truck was gone, and her mum had fallen asleep on the couch. The house felt empty, too quiet. She looked out the window and saw the road leading to the old lake trail. She knew exactly where he'd gone, and before she could stop herself, she followed. The path to the lake was overgrown, but familiar. Every step brought back a memory. Their bike rides, their summer swims, their shared dreams about leaving town someday. When she reached the water, she saw him sitting on the dock, skipping stones across the surface. He didn't turn when she approached. "You always come here when you need to think," she said softly. "Guess I still do," he replied, throwing another stone, watching it skip 3 times before sinking. For a while, they said nothing, just listened to the wind move through the trees. "When did this start?" she asked finally. He sighed. "I don't know. Maybe it was always there, just waiting." She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. "I hate that it feels wrong," she whispered. He looked down, his voice low. "It doesn't feel wrong to me. It just feels hard." Her heart twisted at his words, because that was exactly how she felt too. It wasn't wrong, just complicated. The kind of love the world would never understand. The sound of water lapping against the dock filled the silence. And for a long moment, it felt like the world had paused for them. Ethan finally stood, holding out a hand. "Come on. Let's head back before it rains." She took it, her hand trembling slightly in his, and together they walked back down the trail. That night, thunder rolled across the sky again. The power flickered, then went out completely. The house fell into darkness, broken only by the soft glow of a single candle on the kitchen table. Lily found Ethan there, lighting another one. "You'd think by now Mom would fix the generator," she joked weakly. Trying to hide her nerves, he smiled. "You know she never does." They sat across from each other, the candlelight dancing across their faces. The storm outside grew louder, and somehow the small kitchen felt like the only safe place left in the world. "You ever think about leaving this town?" he asked suddenly. "All the time," she said. "But something always pulls me back." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that something isn't a town." Her heart skipped, and she looked away, tracing her finger along the edge of the table. The flickering light made his face look softer. "Sadder, Ethan," she whispered. "What are we doing?" He leaned back, exhaling. "I don't know. But I'm tired of pretending." The storm crashed outside, lightning lighting up the room. He looked at her then, and she saw everything, the years of friendship, the quiet love he'd hidden, the fear, the longing, all of it. It made her breath catch. She wanted to speak, to make sense of it all, but no words came. When the thunder faded, he reached for her hand across the table. His touch was gentle, steady, like he was afraid she'd pull away, but she didn't. The silence stretched between them, fragile but full of meaning. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally. "You won't," she whispered. "But I don't know how to keep this from breaking everything. Maybe some things are meant to change," he said quietly. "Even if it hurts." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall, and she squeezed his hand just once before standing. "Good night, Ethan," she said softly, and walked away before he could see her cry. That night she couldn't sleep again. She lay awake, listening to the rain, replaying every word, every look, every heartbeat. The truth had finally been spoken, and yet it only made everything harder. Her heart was caught between fear and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The next morning, the sun returned, warm and golden as if nothing had happened. Ethan was outside working on his truck, shirt damp with sweat, focus sharp. She stood at the window for a moment, watching him, feeling that same tremor inside her. Later, when he came in for breakfast, their eyes met briefly, and though neither spoke of the night before, everything was different now. They didn't need words to feel it. The air between them hummed quietly, full of tension and tenderness over the next few days. They tried to go back to normal, but it didn't work. Every small moment felt heavier. Every accidental touch carried meaning. Every glance lingered too long. Her mom noticed their unease but said nothing, only smiling softly as if she already knew something they didn't. One evening, while helping him carry firewood, Lily stumbled slightly on the steps. Ethan caught her arm before she fell. For a second, their faces were inches apart, his hand warm against her skin. She looked up at him, breathless, and for a brief, dizzy heartbeat, it felt like time stopped. He let go quickly, stepping back, his jaw tight. "You okay?" She nodded, whispering, "Yeah," but her voice was barely there. That night, she stood at the window again, watching him sit by the fire pit outside, the flames reflected in his eyes. And she could tell he was thinking about the same thing she was. What it meant to care for someone the world told you not to. Lily pressed her forehead against the cold glass and whispered to herself, "We can't keep running from it, down below." As if he'd somehow heard her, Ethan looked up toward her window. Their eyes met across the distance, and neither of them moved. The fire burned low. The night grew still. And in that fragile, unspoken silence, everything changed again. The next morning came with a strange calm. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clean. The air smelled like wet pine and sunlight, and everything around the old blue house shimmered as if reborn. Lily stood on the porch holding a cup of coffee, watching the steam rise and curl into the soft morning air. Her thoughts were a mess, tangled like the branches swaying in the breeze. She hadn't seen Ethan since last night, not really. He'd gone for an early drive before dawn, maybe to clear his head, maybe to escape the heaviness that had built between them. She didn't blame him. The silence they shared wasn't the comfortable kind anymore. It was loaded, fragile, like glass that might crack with a single word. Her mom's voice called from inside, "You two should repaint that fence today." The rain ruined half of it. Lily smiled faintly. "Yeah, we'll get to it," she said, even though she wasn't sure she could face him yet. By the time Ethan returned, the sun was high and bright. He parked his truck quietly, stepping out with that same thoughtful look he always carried. His eyes met hers across the yard, and for a second, neither moved. The distance between them felt like 1,000 unspoken sentences. He finally walked over, his steps slow, his voice soft. "Morning." "Hey," she answered, trying to sound casual, but her chest tightened. He nodded toward the fence. "Guess your mom wants it fixed again." "Guess so," she said. Forcing a smile, they started working in silence, the sound of brushes scraping wood filling the space between them. The world felt too bright, too still, like even nature was holding its breath. After a few minutes, Ethan spoke, his tone quiet but steady. "Lily, I've been thinking." She froze slightly, her hand trembling as she dipped the brush again. "About what?" "About us," he said. "About what's been happening." Her heart raced. She didn't look up, afraid of what she might see in his eyes, and she whispered. He sighed, setting the brush down. "We can't keep pretending it's nothing, but we also can't let it destroy everything we've built." She finally looked at him, the sunlight catching the edge of his jaw, the sadness in his eyes. "So what do we do?" "I don't know," he said. "But I think maybe we both need space to breathe, to figure out who we are away from this place." The words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to argue, to tell him that distance wouldn't fix anything. But deep down, she knew he was right. The feelings they shared had grown too close to the edge, too wild to stay hidden. "So you're leaving," she said quietly. "Just for a while," he replied. "A friend in Portland offered me work at his shop. I think I should go." She nodded, trying to hide the sting of tears. "When?" "Tomorrow morning," he said. It felt like the world tilted beneath her feet. Everything had happened so fast, and now it was ending just as quickly. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's good, you should go," she said softly, then turned away before he could see her cry. The rest of the day passed like a blur. They stayed busy, fixing things, cooking dinner, pretending it was just another day. But every glance, every quiet moment, carried a goodbye neither of them wanted to say out loud. That night, Lily couldn't sleep again. The moonlight slipped through her curtains. Pale and soft, she tossed and turned, her thoughts refusing to rest. Finally, she got up and walked outside, barefoot. The grass was cool beneath her feet. The world was silent except for the soft chirping of crickets. Ethan was sitting on the porch steps, a duffel bag beside him, staring at the stars. "You're up," he said without turning. "So are you," she replied, sitting down beside him. They didn't speak for a long time. The night was full of things they couldn't say. "Do you really have to go?" she asked finally. He looked at her then, his eyes tired but kind. "Yeah, I think I do. Not because I want to leave you, but because I need to understand what this means." She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. "You think space will change how we feel?" He shook his head slowly. "No. But maybe it will make it easier to live with it." The words hurt, but they also carried truth. The kind of truth that made her heart ache, and yet somehow felt right. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything," he replied. "Don't disappear." He smiled faintly. "I couldn't even if I tried." They sat there in silence for a while, the stars flickering above them. The air was cool and gentle. The world felt both too big and too small at once. Lily leaned her head on his shoulder, and he didn't move away. They stayed like that until the first light of dawn began to paint the horizon. When morning came, he loaded his truck. Her mum hugged him goodbye, telling him to drive safe. Lily stood by the porch steps, trying to hold herself together. He looked at her one last time, and for a second, she saw every memory flash in his eyes: laughter, storms, quiet nights, and everything in between. "Take care of her," he said to her mom, then turned back to Lily. "I'll call when I get there." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He started the engine, and the sound felt like an ending. She waved as he drove down the road, the truck disappearing slowly between the maple trees. The moment he was gone, the silence hit her like a wave. For days after, the house felt emptier, the air quieter. The fence they painted still gleamed white, but it looked lonelier somehow. She kept herself busy, helping her mum, cleaning, reading, but nothing filled the space he'd left behind. At night, she'd sit on the porch steps, staring at the same stars they'd watched together. Sometimes she'd hear the echo of his laugh in the wind. Sometimes she'd imagine him walking up the driveway again, carrying that half smile that always melted her walls. Weeks turned into months, and slowly life moved forward. She went back to college, started writing again, trying to pour all her feelings into words. She wrote about love and distance, about how some hearts meet too soon, or maybe too late. Then one cold afternoon in December, she came home for the holidays. The snow fell gently outside as she carried her bag up the porch steps. The house looked the same, but something inside her felt lighter now. When she opened the door, her mom called out from the kitchen, "There's someone waiting for you." Her heart skipped, and before she could ask who, she saw him, Ethan, standing by the fireplace, holding a small wrapped box. For a second, she couldn't move. "You're back," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, smiling softly. "I finished the job early, and I figured I owed you that call I never made." She laughed through a breath that sounded too close to a sob. "You could have just called. I wanted to see you," he said quietly. She took a step closer, the warmth from the fire brushing her face. "So, how was Portland?" "Good," he said. "But it didn't feel like home." Her eyes met his, and in that moment, she realized something. Sometimes love doesn't need to be rushed. Sometimes it just waits, quietly, until both hearts are ready. He handed her the box. "Open it," he said. Inside was a small carved pendant, a maple leaf. "Smooth and simple. For the road you'll take next," he said. "And for the one that always brings you back." Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he said. "Because no matter where I go, this will always be home. And you'll always be part of it." The fire crackled softly. The snow fell outside. And for the first time in a long while, Lily felt peace. She didn't know what their future would look like. Maybe they'd find their way back to each other completely. Maybe they'd stay as two hearts connected across time and memory. But she knew this moment mattered, as they sat together by the fire. Watching the light dance across the walls, Lily smiled. Her heart trembling, not with confusion anymore, but with quiet understanding. Love, she realized, doesn't always need a perfect ending. Sometimes it just needs to be real, to be honest, to exist, even if only in a house on Maple Street, after the rain has passed.